In today's episode, we're highlighting 5 of the most gruesome safari attacks ever recorded. From a photographer getting attacked by a stealthy leopard, to siblings getting eaten by an ancient predator of the Luangwa River. But first, we start in a South African province, where a tour guide who raised a cub thought she could tame the king of the jungle, forgetting that predators are forever predators. On the afternoon of August 2015, the skies over Limpopo province hung heavy with the promise of rain across the private game reserve where Carla Meyer had dedicated the last 15 years of her life. Carla wasn't just any tour guide. At 41, she had built a reputation in South Africa's wildlife community as someone who possessed an exceptional understanding of big cat behavior. Her colleagues respected her expertise, but privately worried about her growing confidence around the predators, especially Shumba. Shumba wasn't just any lion to Carla. Growing up on a cattle farm, Carla had always been the one to bottle feed orphaned calves, developing an unshakable belief that love could overcome nature's wildness. When she arrived at the reserve 15 years ago, she was escaping a painful divorce and the loss of her own chance at motherhood. Shumba's arrival as an orphaned cub filled that void. Those late nights bottle feeding him created a maternal bond that transcended professional boundaries. When the reserve changed management, new safety protocols were implemented. No handler was to enter a predator's enclosure alone, no exceptions. But Carla saw these rules as unnecessary for her relationship with Shumba. She began finding ways to circumvent the protocols, creating excuses to be alone with her lion. The other handlers knew, but most looked the other way out of respect for her experience. Carla insisted that Shumba needed his space during feeding time and that too many people made him anxious. The new management reluctantly granted her special permission to continue working closely with Shumba, though they insisted on CCTV monitoring during these sessions. Carla agreed, confident that nothing would ever go wrong. That fateful August afternoon, Carla arrived at Shumba's enclosure with his usual meal, 20 pounds of raw meat in a steel feeding bowl. She entered the main enclosure. This was her favorite part of the day, just her and Shumba. Carla failed to recognize that even captive lions retain their predatory instincts. Male lions mature around 3, becoming more aggressive and territorial. Over recent weeks, Shumba's body language had subtly changed. His tail flicked more agitatedly and his ears were more forward and alert when she approached. Lions communicate primarily through body language, and Shumba had been signaling a shift in his comfort level that went unheeded. She set the bowl down in the usual spot and stepped back, watching as Shumba approached. As Shumba began to eat, Carla did something she'd done hundreds of times before. She sat down nearby. She never approached him while he was eating, knowing that even domesticated cats can be territorial around food. But today, she noticed the bowl was at an awkward angle. She leaned forward to adjust the steel bowl for him. In the monitoring room, a junior handler was watching the CCTV feed. He saw Carla reach toward the feeding bowl. He dropped his pan and grabbed the radio, but it was already too late. Shumba's head snapped toward Carla with lightning speed. In one fluid motion, his massive jaws clamped around her forearm. The handler watched in horror as the lion yanked Carla to the ground with shocking force. He shouted into the radio, calling for emergency backup, alerting everyone about the situation. Carla was just adjusting Shumba's bowl. The next, she was on the ground, blood now filling her mouth. The lion she had raised from a cub, the animal she trusted more than most humans. She gasped his name as she tried to make eye contact with the lion. But the lion before her wasn't the gentle giant she had raised. His eyes were cold, predatory, completely void of recognition. He released her mangled arm with a sickening crunch, blood streaming down her fingers. Without pause, he lunged for her throat, his 400 pounds of muscle and bone slamming her to the ground with devastating force. His massive paws pinned her shoulders, claws digging through fabric and into skin. When lions attack, they typically target the neck or throat of their prey, an instinctive behavior designed to quickly incapacitate victims by cutting off air supply or severing major blood vessels. The emergency response team arrived at the enclosure 3 minutes after the handler's call, but they were already too late. The blast from the fire extinguishers drove Shumba back long enough for 2 handlers to drag Carla's body toward the gate, while others kept the lion at bay. But it was far too late. The damage to her throat and upper chest was catastrophic. Despite the medical team's desperate efforts, she was pronounced dead at the scene, her body covered with a simple canvas tarp as the rain finally began to fall. In the days that followed, the reserve was closed to visitors. Shumba was euthanized under the reserve's fatal attack policy, despite protest from some who argued that he was just acting on instinct. Carla's family requested privacy, but released a statement asking that people remember her for her passion and dedication to wildlife conservation, not for the manner of her death. While Shumba's attack was fueled by instinct and territorial aggression, our next encounter reveals the calculated patience of nature's perfect ambush predator. The morning of June 3, 2013 broke with a spectacular African sunrise over the Okavango Delta. Golden light spilled across the wetlands, creating a photographer's dream of shadows and reflections. Andreas Keller woke before dawn in his tent. Today was the day he would finally capture the shot he'd been planning for months. At 46, Andreas had built an impressive career capturing the world's most dangerous animals in their natural habitats. The German photographer was known for his patience and his willingness to go to extraordinary lengths for the perfect shot. But there was one animal that had always eluded his lens in the way he wanted to capture it: the leopard. Not just any leopard shot, but a mother with her cubs in their den. Unlike lions, leopards are solitary hunters that come together only to mate. Female leopards raise their cubs alone. For their first 8 weeks of their lives, leopard cubs remain hidden in a den while their mother hunts. This secretive behavior makes photographing leopard families extraordinarily difficult and dangerous. Andreas had been tracking a particular female leopard for weeks. The local guides called her Shadow. He had glimpsed her several times, always from a distance, always too briefly for the intimate portrait he envisioned. The head ranger Kibo had warned him over dinner the previous night about the dangers of approaching leopards with cubs, describing them as the most dangerous animals in Africa. More dangerous than lions or buffalo because they attack without warning. He promised Kibo he would take one of the guides with him, but as the sun rose, Andreas made a fateful decision. The guides were busy with a group of tourists that morning. If he waited for them to be available, he might miss the perfect light. Besides, he reasoned, he wouldn't actually be staying near the den, just setting up the camera and leaving. He packed his equipment, the motion-activated camera, the infrared trigger, extra batteries, and memory cards. He slipped his satellite phone into his pocket and clipped his GPS tracker to his belt. The walk to the thicket took longer than expected. The morning grew hot and sweat soaked through Andreas's khaki shirt. Every step brought him closer to what could be the defining image of his career. What Andreas couldn't fully appreciate was that leopards have evolved remarkable senses to detect threats to their young. Their hearing can pick up high-frequency sounds like rodents moving underground, and their sense of smell is 14 times more sensitive than a human's. Most importantly, leopards have adapted for stealth. Their flexible shoulder blades allow them to flatten their bodies when stalking, and specialized pads on their feet silence their approach. He selected a large acacia tree about 30 yards from where he suspected the den entrance to be, close enough for the camera to capture detail, far enough to hopefully not disturb the leopard. he moved to a second position, setting up another camera to capture a different angle. The setup was complete. Just as he was about to step away, his boot caught on an exposed root. He stumbled forward, creating more noise than intended. The forest had gone completely quiet. No bird calls, no rustling leaves, just a heavy silence that permeated the area. Andreas hurriedly secured his last camera and began to gather his tools. When suddenly a blur of motion dropped from the branches above. There had been no growl, no rustling of leaves, no indication of the leopard's presence until the moment of attack. Leopards are one of the few big cats that regularly hunt from trees, using gravity to add force to their initial strike. They can leap up to 20 feet horizontally and 10 feet vertically, and often position themselves directly above game trails to ambush passing prey. The impact knocked Andreas flat on his stomach. The leopard's jaws clamped down on the back of his neck with crushing force. Andreas's body twisted reflexively, his arm coming up in what appeared to be an instinctive defensive motion. The leopard adjusted its attack, jaws locking around his forearm, teeth penetrating through muscle and contacting bone. The leopard released his arm only to reposition, moving to deliver another bite to the back of the neck. The cameras that Andreas had just set up captured the entire sequence, their motion sensor triggered by the sudden activity. At the ranger station, Kibo was reviewing the morning's patrol schedule when he remembered Andreas's interest in the leopard den. On a hunch, he checked the GPS tracking system, bringing him to a shock after seeing Andreas's GPS appearing in a restricted area. Kibo quickly assembled a response team and they followed the GPS signal to find Andreas's backpack, and 15 meters away, his body partially dragged beneath a bush. The leopard had started moving her kill to a safer spot, likely planning to return once the area felt secure. Kibo approached cautiously, rifle ready, but there was no need for weapons now. Andreas had become part of the life and death cycle he'd spent his career documenting. The bite on the back of his neck showed the leopard's distinct crushing bite, designed to sever the spinal cord quickly. The recovery team collected his equipment, including cameras that recorded his final moments. Reviewing the footage later, they found a striking final frame. The leopard standing over Andreas's body, her eyes reflecting the camera flash. It was a tragic yet intimate portrait of the wild leopard he had sought to capture. News of Andreas's death sent shockwaves through the wildlife photography community. Tributes poured in from colleagues and admirers around the world, many acknowledging that while his death was tragic, he died doing what he loved most, pursuing the perfect image of nature in its purest form. The leopard and her cubs were left undisturbed. As Kibo explained to park authorities, she was protecting her young. This is the law of nature, and they must respect it even when it costs them dearly. While Andreas Keller's camera captured his final moments with a mother leopard, two siblings in Zambia were about to face an even more ancient predator. The silent hunters of the Luangwa River would demonstrate a different kind of deadly efficiency. The morning of April 7, 2015 dawned bright and clear over the small village nestled along the banks of the Luangwa River in Zambia. The air was filled with the sounds of birds calling to one another. Moses Chisongo woke with the sun. At 14, he was already taking on the responsibilities of a young man in his community. He helped his father with fishing, assisted his mother with chores, and most importantly, looked after his 9-year-old sister, Zira. Moses was a serious boy with a quick mind. His teachers at the local school often remarked that he could go far if given the opportunity. He excelled at mathematics and science, dreaming of one day becoming a doctor who could help his village. Zira was his opposite in many ways. Spirited and carefree with a smile that could charm even the sternest elder in the village. She collected colorful stones and feathers, creating little treasures that she kept in a wooden box under her bed. The village had grown alongside a popular safari lodge that attracted tourists from around the world to experience the wildlife of the Luangwa Valley. The relationship was symbiotic. Many villagers worked at the lodge, which also supported the local school and clinic. Their mother Nakunda warned them almost daily to stay away from the river. She would remind them that the crocodiles were hungry and clever. The Nile crocodile is one of Africa's most successful predators, unchanged for 85 million years. Adults usually grow between 11 and 16 feet long and can weigh up to 1,650 pounds. With a bite force of 5,000 pounds per square inch, the strongest of any animal, they are 10 times more powerful than a great white shark. Moses understood the danger. Safari guides warned tourists that these massive reptiles could hold their breath for up to 2 hours, waiting motionless for the perfect moment to strike. With eyes, ears, and nostrils on the top of their heads, they can remain nearly submerged while keeping watch. Most chillingly, they possess unmatched patience, sometimes observing potential prey for days before attacking. On this particular April morning, with school closed for a local holiday, the temptation of adventure proved too strong to resist. Zira wanted to go to the river to find more flat stones that skip across the water. Moses knew the dangers, but they had done this multiple times before. Whenever they'd go out to find rocks, Zira would always stay at the high bank, away from the waters. Their mother was visiting a sick relative in a neighboring village and wouldn't return until evening. Their father was working at the safari lodge, helping to repair one of the guest cabins. The children left a note saying they were going to play near the big baobab tree. Not exactly a lie, but not the full truth either. The walk to the river took about 20 minutes. The Luangwa River had a pod of hippos, mostly submerged, with just their eyes, ears, and nostrils visible above the surface. What the children couldn't see were the predators that made this river one of the most densely populated crocodile habitats in Africa. Moses led his sister to a spot on the high bank where they could hang out while looking for rocks. Zira was intensely looking for skipping stones while Moses kept watch and also looked for rocks. But something caught Zira's eyes, a rock near the water's edge. She went near it. Suddenly, the river exploded in a splash and a massive crocodile lunged with terrifying speed. It clamped around Zira's leg, causing a sharp sound. Crocodiles strike with astonishing speed, up to 20 miles per hour in water, using their powerful tails to propel forward. Zira's scream of terror and pain tore through the peaceful morning. Moses watched in horror as his sister was yanked off her feet, the crocodile already beginning its death roll, the instinctive spinning motion that crocodilians use to dismember prey too large to swallow whole. Moses dropped his rocks and without hesitation he ran to grab his sister, forgetting the dangers that were in the waters. The crocodile had dragged Zira several meters from shore, but the water was still shallow enough for Moses to reach them. Momentarily, the crocodile released its grip on Zira's mangled leg, and she began to crawl desperately toward the shore, leaving a trail of blood in the water. Moses tried to help her. But the momentary victory was shattered by a second eruption from the water. Another crocodile, even larger than the first, had been attracted by the commotion and the scent of blood. This one targeted Moses, its massive jaws closing around his torso with crushing force. The first crocodile returned to Zira, who was now barely conscious from blood loss and shock. It reclaimed its prey, dragging her in the opposite direction from her brother. On the riverbank above, 2 workers from the safari lodge had heard the screams and came running. They arrived just in time to witness the horrific scene below. 2 massive crocodiles disappearing into deeper water, each with a child in its jaws. Hours later, as the sun began to set, the search teams made their grim discoveries. The children's bodies were found separately, washed up on a sand bank downstream. The village mourned deeply. Their mother and father were deeply heartbroken. The safari lodge closed for 3 days out of respect, and the manager announced that they would fund a new fence along the most dangerous stretches of the river near the village. As the waters of the Luangwa River closed for Moses and Zira Chisongo, a young zoologist student in India, Naveen Sharma, would face his death from above as he ventured just a few steps off a well-worn path into the domain of one of India's most unpredictable predators. The morning of February 22, 2012 was unusually cool for central India, with a light mist hanging over the dense bamboo forest of Satpura Tiger Reserve. Naveen Sharma woke before his classmates, excitement making sleep impossible. At 21, he was in his final year of zoology studies at Delhi University, and this field trip to Satpura was the culmination of years of hard work and dedication. Naveen had always been the serious one in his family. From childhood, Naveen was obsessed with wildlife research, spending weekends volunteering at animal rescue centers instead of socializing with peers. His experience with sedated rescue animals had given him dangerous, false confidence about wild predator behavior. They had arrived at the reserve 3 days ago and had already documented dozens of species. Spotted deer, wild boar, gore, and even a fleeting glimpse of a leopard disappearing into the underbrush. But the crown jewel of Satpura, the Bengal tiger, had eluded them so far. Tigers may be the most famous residents of Satpura, but the reserve is also home to a significant population of sloth bears, one of India's most misunderstood and dangerous mammals. Despite their name and clumsy gait, sloth bears are not true sloths but a unique species native to the Indian subcontinent. Weighing 120 to 310 pounds, they have curved claws for digging, powerful jaws to crush termite mounds, and a gap in their front teeth for sucking up insects. Sloth bears lack the submissive behavior seen in many other bear species when threatened. Instead of retreating, they often charge at perceived threats, earning them a fearsome reputation. Wildlife biologists have recorded more aggressive encounters between humans and sloth bears than with tigers, leopards, and wolves combined in areas where these species coexist. Their guide, Rajesh, explained they would be entering the bamboo thickets today, an area known for sloth bear activity, so they must stay together at all times. They set off in a single file, Rajesh leading the way with Professor Mehta close behind. The bamboo forest was unlike anything Naveen had experienced before. The tall stalks created a natural maze. The ground was carpeted with fallen leaves that muffled their footsteps. As they walked, Naveen's attention was caught by something on a tree just off the trail. Claw marks. Fresh ones. This was exactly the kind of evidence he needed for his research. He stepped off the trail for a closer look, moving just a few meters away from the group. The rest of the group continued forward, unaware that Naveen had stopped. Naveen raised his camera, focusing carefully on the claw marks. They were deeper than expected, gouging several centimeters into the bark. What Naveen failed to recognize was that these weren't just territorial markings. They were fresh-feeding signs of a female sloth bear with cubs. Sloth bears often strip bark to reach insects, and these marks were only hours old. The presence of cubs greatly increased the danger, as female bears with young are the most aggressive and unpredictable of all large mammals. So absorbed was he in his documentation that he failed to notice the subtle changes around him. The sudden silence as birds stopped calling, nature's warning signs. The female sloth bear had been foraging with her 2 cubs about 20 meters away. With poor eyesight but an exceptional sense of smell, she detected Naveen when the breeze shifted. To her, he was a threat to her vulnerable young, and there was no hesitation in her response. Naveen had just finished his documentation when he heard it, a deep, guttural woofing sound. The bear stood less than 5 meters away, her fur bristling and teeth bared. Behind her, 2 cubs scrambled up a tree. Rising onto her hind legs, she towered nearly 2 meters tall, claws extended. This posture, often mistaken for aggression, is actually a way for bears to gather information. Standing upright helps them see, smell, and assess threats. However, if the bear feels danger to herself or her cubs, this is quickly followed by a charge, often in less than a second. Naveen managed to take 1 step backward before his foot caught on a root. That slight movement was all it took. The bear dropped to all 4s and charged. Unlike other bear species that may bluff charge or stop short, sloth bears rarely break off an attack once started. Their assaults typically focus on the face and head, a behavior believed to have evolved to counter threats like tigers and leopards, which target the neck and throat. This facial targeting makes sloth bear attacks especially devastating to humans. A scream broke through the forest, a sound of pure terror that reached the group, making everyone freeze in horror. Rajesh commanded everyone to stay put as he pulled a flare gun from his pack. He and Professor Mehta raced back down the trail toward the sound. The rest of the students huddled together in shocked silence. They found Naveen less than 100 meters back, but they were already too late. The bear was on top of him, her powerful jaws clamped onto his face, her claws tearing through his abdomen with terrible efficiency. Rajesh fired the flare gun immediately, the loud bang and bright flash startling the bear enough that she released her grip and backed away, disappearing into the bamboo to retrieve her cubs. The damage had been done. Naveen lay motionless on the forest floor, his face unrecognizable, his torso torn open. Blood soaked into the earth around him, turning the fallen leaves a deep crimson. The evacuation was a nightmare. The students, many in shock and all in tears, had to be led safely back to the ranger station while a team returned with a stretcher for Naveen's body. The forest department was notified, reports were filed, and the grim task of informing Naveen's parents fell to Professor Mehta. At Delhi University, a small memorial garden was planted in Naveen's honor, featuring native plants that attract butterflies and birds, a living tribute to a young man who had loved all forms of wildlife. While Naveen's blood soaked into the forest floor of Satpura Tiger Reserve, a seasoned safari guide in Kenya, Elise Van Wyck, would face a silent charge from an adversary known throughout Africa as the Black Death. The morning of July 30th, 2018 broke over Tsavo East National Park with a spectacular African sunrise. Elise Van Wyck woke in her small cabin at the safari camp. At 34, the South African-born guide had built a reputation as one of the most knowledgeable walking safari leaders in Kenya. She had come to Tsavo 5 years earlier, drawn by its vast, untamed landscapes and relatively low tourist numbers compared to the more famous Masai Mara. This morning, she was scheduled to lead a short walking safari for 2 American tourists. David and Rebecca Thornton, a couple in their 50s celebrating their 25th wedding anniversary. They had specifically requested Elise after reading glowing reviews of her knowledge and professionalism. Over breakfast at the camp's open-air dining area, Elise briefed the couple on what to expect. David asked about predators. Elise reassured them that lions and leopards generally rest during the day and avoid humans when possible. They would have a ranger with a rifle accompanying them as a precaution. But the greatest danger on a walking safari isn't from predators, but from a Cape buffalo. They're responsible for more human deaths in Africa than any other large animal. But she assured them that they would keep a safe distance if they encountered any. They move in herds, so they're easier to spot. The Cape buffalo, often called the Black Death or the Widowmaker by African hunters, can weigh up to 1,900 pounds and have massive horns that span up to 5 feet. Considered one of Africa's most dangerous animals, Cape buffalo don't flee from humans but actively stalk and ambush perceived threats. With exceptional memory, they've been known to track and attack hunters who wounded them days earlier. After breakfast, the small group gathered at the camp entrance. Joining them was Kamani, a Kenya Wildlife Service ranger armed with a rifle. He had worked with Elise many times before. They went eastward, the sun climbing higher in the cloudless sky. The heat was building, but a persistent breeze made it comfortable enough. About an hour into their walk, they crested a small rise and were rewarded with a spectacular view. A herd of zebra grazing alongside a group of impala, with 3 towering giraffes browsing on acacia trees in the background. For nearly 20 minutes, they observed the peaceful scene. As they prepared to move on, Kimani pointed to their right. About 300 meters away, a lone Cape buffalo. Elise studied the buffalo through her binoculars. It appeared calm, methodically cropping the grass with no signs of agitation. It was unusual to see a buffalo alone, but sometimes older bulls were forced out of the herd by younger, stronger males. Elise concluded that they were fine. They would continue on their planned route, which would take them away from the buffalo, now moving at a slightly brisker pace and maintaining a wide berth around the buffalo. Elise kept glancing in its direction, monitoring its behavior. What she couldn't know, what no one could know without closer inspection, was that this particular buffalo wasn't simply an old bull enjoying a solitary meal. It had been injured several days earlier in a fight with a rival, suffering a deep gore wound in its flank that was now infected and causing significant pain. The injury had forced it away from its herd, and the constant discomfort had made it unusually irritable and unpredictable. Injured animals are more dangerous to humans as pain increases aggression. For social animals like Cape buffalo, isolation from the herd adds stress, making them more prone to unprovoked attacks. As the safari group continued along their path, the distance between them and the buffalo gradually decreased. The animal raised its head, finally noticing the humans about 200 meters away. Its ears flicked forward, a subtle warning sign that Elise immediately recognized. She quietly told the Thorntons to move a bit faster and angle more to the left, away from the buffalo. They adjusted their course, but it was already too late. The animal suddenly lowered its head and began to charge. A charging buffalo can reach speeds of 35 miles per hour, faster than any human can run. More importantly, they can maintain this speed over considerable distances, unlike predators like lions that rely on short bursts of acceleration. Once a buffalo commits to a charge, it rarely breaks off the attack until the threat is eliminated or it becomes physically unable to continue. Elise saw it coming. She made a fast decision, telling everyone to run. The Thorntons sprinted away from the danger. Kimani raised his rifle, but the buffalo was moving too fast, the distance closing rapidly. Instead of running, Elise moved in the opposite direction, waving her arms and shouting to draw the buffalo's attention away from her clients. The enraged animal swerved toward her, its massive head lowered, the deadly horns aimed directly at her torso. Elise tried to dodge at the last moment, a move that had saved her once before during a close encounter with a black rhino. But the buffalo anticipated her movement with uncanny precision. The impact was devastating. One horn caught Elise squarely in the abdomen, penetrating deeply before the buffalo lifted its head in a violent upward motion, launching her body into the air as if she weighed nothing. She landed heavily several meters away, the breath knocked from her lungs, a searing pain spreading through her core. Kimani fired his rifle, the shot echoing across the savannah. The bullet struck the buffalo's shoulder but failed to reach vital organs. The ranger fired again, this time hitting the animal in the neck. Kimani managed to fire a third shot at point-blank range before diving behind a fallen tree. This final bullet found its mark, and the massive beast collapsed. He shouted for the Thorntons to stay where they were as he needed to radio for help. But help, when it came, arrived too late for Elise Van Wyck. By the time the emergency response team reached them in a patrol vehicle, she had already succumbed to massive internal bleeding. Her final conscious act had been to squeeze Kamari's hand and whisper that the animals are worth it, always worth it. The Thorntons were physically unharmed but deeply traumatized. In the aftermath, Tsavo East National Park implemented additional training for walking safari guides, emphasizing the importance of recognizing signs of injury or distress in potentially dangerous animals. Want to watch more kinds of these videos? Click the video on the screen. And thanks for watching.